that? That's my opening question right now. How was that to delve into vulnerability and shame, particularly if you are in a Black body? I'm really curious. Were there things that came up for you that resonated? Were there things that resonated but you had never even thought of before? Are there things that you have discovered that you're still thinking about as, you know, as we process the end of the book together? Are there things you feel like you can navigate and pull into your own life? Is this book helpful? Can we use it? And if so, why? Why do you think that is? Oftentimes here at book club, particularly in non-white body, we read stories to see how characters navigate their lives. And we therefore say, maybe I could apply this to my life or the lives of those I love. So is that tangible for folks here? I see you nodding yes. Can you tell me why you think so?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, you unmute yourself. That's why I was like, she's not gonna unmute herself and then. Yeah, you're so polite though. I love you. Thank you.
I like the beginning of Yolo Keely Robinson's. And what she says, sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself there is nothing wrong with me. I have patterns to unlearn, new behaviors to embody, and wounds to heal. But there is nothing wrong with me and the core of who I am. I am unlearning generations of harm and remembering love. It takes time. And that's wonderful.
That really resonated with me as well, right? The idea that you're not done, that you can
exactly.
And it's not your fault, because how could it be your fault if you're still learning and you're not done? Thank you, Tara. That part made me cry a little. I was like, wow. You know?
I think from these stories, I was questioning a lot too. Like, what does shame healed look like? Because we're seeing like the process of it. And like, what does like being healed from it look like? Or do you get healed from it?
Willie, that's so great. And I love you to dig a little more if you can. First, give us like a group definition of shamed healed, and then tell us what is the book, in your opinion, saying it looks like.
So I know they talk about like resilience, right? And I know we've had that conversation in the past with like the overcoming, but it's just like, I just feel like with these particular stories, it was like, well, what does it look like to come out on the other side of that healing? You know, what does that healing look like? And I guess the healing defined would be that, like, I guess working through the triggers of it. And, you know, I don't know specifically what I would define the healing of shame as, but I know that it probably looks like a lot of work, and yeah, just a lot of work.
Right. We could say the work. I think that's a plausible answer, you know? That's lovely. Thank you, Willie. Any other thoughts?
Somebody actually defined shame. I was looking for it. One of the authors did, but I can't remember who it was. But on page 174, in the meantime, Brené Brown quotes Audre Lorde as saying, shame is a tool of the oppressor. Shame is meant to evoke a trauma response. Shame is meant to produce fear and flight.
What did that do for you, Tiffany, when you came across that Lorde quote?
I'm not surprised. That was a very thorough explanation. It makes sense. And you could see that exemplified in everybody's work when they're talking about their own personal experiences and trying to overcome shame.
Did anyone have a moment of like coming across that Audre Lorde quote? You know that I don't even know what it is really. It's a campaign, it's an Instagram account, but it's like, because of them, we can. Are y'all familiar with that? And it'll name like folks who have done stuff in the past so that other Black bodies can step into space. I felt very much, because we had just finished reading Zami and coming across that. It's like, wow, it's sort of like this idea that Audrey swam so we can have a boat ride. You know what I mean? Like this idea that we actually know where that comes from when Audrey is giving that idea of shame, right? Even without explicitly naming the word shame, we literally just got out of that world, a couple weeks ago. So I had one of those moments like, wow, here we go. No, but just seeing how those aren't independent thoughts. The idea of like having to navigate and work through shame is not a new thing. It's not a new age healing thing. It's a part of healing, and it has always been a part of that. You know what I mean? For many, many years, particularly when we're looking at like Black women naming what that looks like for them, What else? Anybody, everybody, what other things popped up for you? Were there any essays in this last batch that really moved you, that you were like, wow, I learned something new I didn't know?
The Imani Perry section touched me in a way that I didn't expect, because it brought up some very real things for me on page 196, where she talks about vulnerable children and that they have watched us and learned to cleverly cover over wounds, to laugh or lash at them, because vulnerable means subject to higher penalties or deserving of disregard. And I thought back to, how often are we said we have to be better than they are? We have to be 200% better, and not to show anything. We show any weaknesses, and that's just not something that we do. And then, even though we know that that's wrong, she goes on to say, never ask. I say ourselves, because I feel like as a mother, I have done this as well. I'm guilty of it. How is it that I keep telling the vulnerable not to be vulnerable? How is it that I fasten my eyes to write down even more judgment on top of judgment, and will not acknowledge the mounds on her back and that threaten to bury her? And I'm a mother of a daughter, and I think of what she's learned from watching me, what I've learned from my own mother, and how it just keeps going and going and going.
Linda, thank you. Absolutely. And again, it's that acknowledgement of shame almost. So this idea that like, if I don't allow you as a mother, as a parent, as a person in your life, if I don't allow you to be in that, if I shame you for that, then how are you're going to go off and do that to yourself and to your daughter, So yeah, I definitely felt ties to the women in my family when I read that. Thank you, Linda.
And how we don't ask for help. I mean,
Right.
we go through it and we don't ask, as we feel embarrassed by it.
Right.
Yeah, but I thought the point of that part of that paragraph, she was talking about the sociologists and social critics. So even if you did ask for help, when it all came down, this is what she says, and they never flinch or hesitate or let their mouths tremble before the ugliness spilling out of them. They never ask themselves, how is it that I, a psychologist, a social worker, or whatever, keeps telling them all these things without realizing that, without addressing the things that are on them to make them to be that way. Right. So you're getting it, it's like a double whammy. So not only are we getting it from our upbringing, we're also getting it from society. And then if you're going to ask for help to try and cope with it, they come back and pile more on top of you instead of really helping you.
Right. And EJ, thank you for naming that, because I think that also brings up a greater point, particularly when you think about Black body and shame, but shame in general, right? Thinking about mental health and stuff like that. The system is almost created to inhibit you from feeling comfortable around needing help. And that's just sort of how most of our Western medicine is in the United States, right? And I think what you're naming is so important. It is the onus of shame, the responsibility and the onus does not only lie within you. You probably have the most power right? To shift and impact how you feel about the things that you've gone through. Only you know your standards and your measures of vulnerability. But it is not your fault or on you that you feel this way, because we literally live in a society that ensures that even as you try to navigate it, you don't get the help you need. And I want to really, really drive, it's one of the main points for me in reading the essay is understanding that within the Black body, there seems to be this universal thread. I won't name a universal experience because we've seen so many different Black folks say their truths, right? But there is a universal thread of shame. And that universal thread, if it's a universal thread, it means that society creates structures for that to be so. It's not necessarily the onus on you as someone. Do y'all get the point that I'm trying to make? Like that was one of the, I don't know, does that resonate for folks? That was one of the main things that I thought about a lot after finishing the book.
We always have to treat our children with love, kindness, and respect. Just like we would treat, everyone. We have to be good to our children always.
Absolutely, Susan. Particularly naming in a society that we don't have institutions that care about our children either, right? So like, I think what you're naming makes sense because we, again, have to show each other how to navigate these forms of shame at home, starting at home.
Loving and kind to our families, always.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting that you say that, Paula, with this starting at home, because thinking about Yolo's essay, right, and what that looked like for him, and that's where kind of shame started, right, was in the home for him, growing up, and his father making comments. I feel like his essay resonated a lot with me because I had a lot of similar experiences growing up, and you don't know what to name it at the time, right, because you're a child, right? So but when you think about it, and then you think about us as adults, and we're presented as these full human adults, right, with these really traumas, these experiences that we all don't have any control over that. But just thinking about that system of oppression, and then how that trickles down into the family, and then it trickles down into these young humans, where where Susan says, where we should be building each other up, but it's kind of stop that. And he names that that he had to realize that his father was kind of just scared, right, of what society would do to him. But we don't see that, and we don't say that a lot, right? Because I used to think that my father just hated me, So, and I in my mind couldn't process that as a child.
Right.
But as an adult, I'm able to reflect back. But that also took a lot of work too. So,
right. Because it requires you not emulating that sort of shame in order to then see, oh, he's ashamed and I'm not. So you know what I mean? And make those disconnects. So thank you, Willie. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But that does take a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
To recognize that.
Right. And I'm sure it's ongoing work.
Loads of work.
Does.
Right. I'm sure it's still going. I'm sure the work isn't over.
Yeah, and let me tell you now, my father is my best friend. Me and him are so, but that took a lot of me seeing the vulnerability in him, and also discussing being brave enough to say when you did this, you may not remember this, but when you did this, this is how I felt, and this is how I still feel. And him being willing to, try to engage in that healing, and that we've been the best of friends.
Yeah, I love that, and I love
maybe that is the shame on the other side that I was talking about earlier. Thinking about it now, connecting it when I was saying about these stories and thinking of my own personal experience and narrative with shame, and kind of I guess coming out on the other side of that.
Right. So healed shame could look like just coming out on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Can
I
we
was gonna say
some love for Willie's box, please?
Yes.
Love, and claps. Tiff, you were saying something. EJ, you were saying something, and I think Mayowa, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name right. Were you also saying something? Feel free to unmute yourselves, folks.
I was just gonna say that, Willie, that YOLO's chapter spoke to me too. There were just so many like aha moments just from things he was saying about, you know, the grown man just showing his rage and he's around too many women. But you know what I really liked? On page 160, he talks about, it's like, for men projected as men, gay culture is an ongoing competition to see who can shame whom first and with the most power. And it was like, I was like, I know people like that. I know gay Black men that do that. And one of my friends does that. He's like, I'm not putting his business on blast, but he's like, if somebody is too effeminate in public, it's like, you know, looking down on them for that. And then, you know, then there's some issues with certain trans perceptions. And if you saw a trans person, he was like, oh, you know, and there was this idea of making us all look bad. And so, you know, a couple of us got together and we were like, you know, we think there's some deeper issues here. And perhaps this is why you're looking at it like this. And he was like, oh, I never thought of it like that. And I feel like that's exactly what Yolo's talking about, like just breaking it down, just saying we're trying to say, it's not a competition, or it shouldn't be, but it does exist. With perhaps, you know, we're queer, but not that queer. We're this, but not that in the community. I just thought that was so interesting that it was broken down like that.
And even joking around too. Like I have like groups of friends, like very close friends, and it's just like it would seem, I remember when we were younger, right? Like in our early 20s and stuff. And it would look like we hated each other because we were just always cutting each other down, being shady, you know, but then like you have to take a step back and you're like, what are we building each other up? And like, you know, and it's all light and jokes, but it's like you really are like tearing each other down. And I feel like as I've evolved and in my late 30s, you know, it's like comes like this awareness of what you're doing and what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Shout out to Revelations.
Revelations, absolutely.
I mean, what else is standing out for folks?
What stood out for me is I thought people really tried to address this complicated thing of like, how do you understand shame, vulnerability, and violence, but within the community in these different ways, right? Like, I get that hurt people, but at the same time, we're also seeing like the really awful effects of the sexual assaults, of the comments, of the aggression on people. And so how do you hold that, like, yes, we are definitively influenced by systems that want us to harm each other, but then what happens when we engage in that harm with one another? And how do we do the healing, especially if your pain isn't acknowledged, isn't validated, isn't seen, whether it's around like sexuality or sexual orientation or sexual violence, like how do we heal in the midst of continuing harm? And then also that role of anger, and what's the anger that pushes us to, that like motivates us to, you know, march on the streets versus the anger that eats us alive and motivates us to harm one another? Like, how do we sit with that? So I just thought that a lot of complications, like a lot of things I'm going to still sit with, came up.
Almost what I hear you naming is what is anger's role, almost, right? Like,
yeah, that's definitely a big piece of it.
Ron.
Ayeko Bethia also kind of speaks to that, like the anger she had with dealing with all of these aggressions against her as a Black woman, but also I believe she's biracial also, and how, you know, how you present yourself has a lot to do with how you navigate those kind of racist environments, you know, your hair texture, your skin color. But also she speaks about, you know, just being at a breaking point at a party and a white woman bumps into her and how she just completely loses it. It's not clear exactly what that woman, you know, how hard the bump was, but it felt like that bump was the accumulation of probably years of bumps that may not have been accompanied by an apology, or may not have even been known by the white person, but the black person has a mental counter, and can maybe not recall each one, but feels the weight of those sort of passive aggressive interactions.
And those interactions bring their own sense of shame, right? Like, even if you didn't do it to yourself, something was done to you, you still have that. So naming that she's actually having these culminations of having to deal with shame until she kind of freaks out and shames someone else for it, and freaks out rightfully, but freaks out. Jacqueline.
Yeah, I forgot the woman's name, but I have met her out in Oakland. And
an author?
Yeah, she has a tiny little book, and it's all about, some of it's about anger, but she goes into great detail about microaggressions and the effect on us. And it was helpful for me in a time when I didn't have the language for what was happening to me on a daily basis in a work context. But I think that I had an encounter with a young woman in a department store, and she was going off on me, and I had done nothing to her. I just didn't cooperate with what she wanted me to do. And I stood there and looked at her, but she was going off. And I recognized her rage and her anger, and I recognized it had nothing to do with me, but that she had been pushed on some kind of edge internally. So I didn't even fight with her. I just kept going. But I see that, people on the subways, we have these edges, and if folks aren't told or shown how to manage that, you're out in the scene. You're out in the scene going off on somebody. I think looking at the microaggressions and the ways that they impact. This sounds like one of those things.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of anger that's fear-based or anxiety-based. Every emotion could be 15 others in disguise. So a mask of anger could actually be a mask. If you take that anger mask off, you actually have someone who's really freaking out with anxiety or fear
or hurting.
Yeah. I'll go on. I didn't get to read as much as I wanted to, so I'm just talking in general.
Girl, that's the name of the game. Thank you so much. Some gems over there for Jacqueline with the whole, I forgot, you said something and EJ and I both went, that was such a great understanding. It was such a great understanding that underneath an emotion lies most likely the origin, another emotion, the real reason, right?
The real reason, yeah.
And naming that in our community, not only, wow, let's take a moment. Everybody about to get 2 gold stars, because not only are we sort of facing the vulnerability, shame, and anxiety that comes with our own decisions and the things that have happened to us, right? But within our community as well. And I'm not just saying like your sister or your partner or your good friend, Ron, right? I mean, people you don't know, people on the subway, people in a store. We also, especially if you live in somewhere like New York City, where you're interacting with folks all the time and there's foot traffic for everything, you sort of get to see at a firsthand basis how people are navigating their anxieties and whether that's happening poorly, right? 9 times out of 10. I mean, you guys, I'm sure if everyone can name every incident they had where they've seen someone freak out on someone in the city, we wouldn't even be here. We'd be flying to Abu Dhabi in our rich jets, right? Like the idea that we don't only have to navigate our pressures, but even of people in our community who we've never met and we don't know, right?
I think that's how the book ends, with Tarana speaking about her own well, she's speaking to her younger self, basically about the anxieties that she has dealt with throughout her life,
right,
and that are just complicated by gender and race.
absolutely. Like the structures of gender and race have emphasized whatever she had to navigate on her own individual level. Right now, it's like the structure itself. She also, I find myself in that anxiety often as well. Not exactly as Tarana describes it, right? Mine manifests differently, particularly after coming, us being in a pandemic, post-Trump presidency. I'm in my 30s. This is like the decade of like being a contributing member to society, right? Sort of, and thinking that if I have to overcome all of these structures, I get anxious. I get really, really anxious thinking about that. And I think about young people who have to go to school in a pandemic and in quarantine, and who are constantly asked to go in school and then get out the building. All of these things are sort of like preliminary phases to, right? Like if you don't recognize it, like the way Tarana is naming, it can overcome you, right? If you don't recognize that society also has these pressures. It's not just the things that happen to me or the decisions I've made, right? And I think something that Mayowa said earlier that blew my mind, those things are interdependent. It's not one versus all. We have to sit with both, right? So it takes time to sort of sit and ask, how am I gonna have a balance between those things? Did anyone feel, I remember us posing a question toward the beginning of coming together, and it was kind of like, did Brené do a good job? To that extent, the question wasn't worded as bratty as I said it, but did Brené do a good job? Did she do Black people justice? Is she just using this to curate a good story? Do we think that Brené did her part? Like, how do we feel? Do y'all still feel skeptical, or do y'all feel like, oh, okay, Brené?
Wait, before we get into that, like, can we just talk about,
switch it up, Tiff.
No, because I was just gonna say, I was really looking forward to Laverne Cox's chapter. And then it was like 1.5 pages long. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, let's talk about it.
I was going to ask that question. Did anybody else get the feeling like,
let's talk about it?
Because I'm like, Laverne Cox, you did a whole big documentary on Netflix talking about trans people, and then here with the book, you write like half a paragraph.
It was a heavy half a paragraph, though.
It was a heavy half a paragraph.
I don't know.
What? Yeah, was it heavy?
I saw it as this. I saw it as the understanding that because she has her work out in the world to this, why, of course, as a Black body, I'll contribute to it. But as a Black trans person, I've actually said and did and put out the way I feel about these things. And it's your job, reader, to find out more about my Black trans life. And I say that in my cis het identity. I don't say that.
Okay. And
I understand that. Hold on, EJ, I'm gonna just finish. I understand that we all definitely have our own relationships to gender norm, but I understand that as the only person there getting half an essay, what I took away from it was like, oh, I'm gonna have to do more work if I wanna know what these avenues and vulnerability of shame look like. I'm not necessarily gonna shame that person for contributing. Again, the book is about freedom. It's about saying as much or as little as you want. And we had this earlier in the book with another author, I can't remember, that Tiffany, I agreed with you. I was like, what's the status? Why are we writing about this? So I just want to name, it's important for us as cishet people, if you identify as cishet, it is important to name that it's okay if we have to extend and do our work a little bit more if we're not given the whole enchilada right there, just because she's a Black trans voice. I think it's part of our work as Black people in the community, especially.
But she didn't. If that could have been her intent, I don't think she succeeded.
That was my intent. That was my intent.
Oh, okay.
On the name. I'm not saying her intent. I'm saying me as the reader.
It felt like. It's like, okay, let me give you. I'm take it to the poetry level.
Yep.
Some poets you read and you get it. Some poets you read, you don't quite get it, but it piques your interest. And then there's some poets you read and you go, is that even a poem?
Right.
And the reason that happens is because they are not in, you don't get any sense of the poet having a reaction to what they have written. You don't get any sense of them in the work. You don't know who they are. They're like invisible in the work.
Right.
And that's what
you felt
Laverne
that way
Cox's-
about this?
And that's what Laverne Cox's essay did for me. It was like, are you really finished? Did you just, it's like I wrote it. It felt like I wrote it because they asked me to write it, not because I was vested in writing it.
Right. I agree. It's the same thing.
Maybe the check wasn't large enough.
Okay. But I agree, EJ. I think we're saying the same exact thing. I agree with that. I think it's like, I'm going to contribute to this. But what I'm saying is that I think that's okay. I think, and especially as a Black trans woman, and we're writing about shame, vulnerability, and trauma, like, I think those interconnected threads, if it then takes me as a cishet reader, Black woman, to have to do a little bit more work in that, which is what I was saying before, then I'm gonna do that. Because I received it as, wow, she's not giving it up today. That's how I received it. Like, she's not giving it up today. And again, she's got a work out there that speaks to this. So I think it's a little brilliant.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I do.
What is it? What were we expecting her to say? I think we have.
I need more. I need more.
Linda, what happened to your camera?
The role of the voyeur in her life. Like, what is it exactly did we want her to say? Were we putting on her the onus of the labor of teaching us all about trans people?
Right. That's
how just the devil's advocate thing.
I didn't expect her to, I did not expect her to, I didn't have any expectation when I read hers, just like I didn't have any expectation for any of the other authors. Right. They wrote what they wrote. It either moved me or it didn't, you know, that kind of thing. But to me, it felt like her essay wasn't finished. I don't know what else she could have said. I don't know where else she could have taken it. But when I read it, I felt like there was something missing from it, that it wasn't like that either they over edited it. No, because she might have sent in more and then they edited it down.
I doubt that.
Or she just didn't, but it felt like it
a lot.
No, I feel
like something was missing from the essay itself.
I felt like Laverne Cox is mad busy. They were like, Laverne Cox, can you do this essay? And she was like, listen, I got 30 minutes to bang this out. And she wrote it because Laverne Cox has a lot to say. I have literally heard her go on and on about how she walks out of the house with that coat of armor, just like she talks about.
She also has a book, y'all. I want to name that. She has a written work.
That's what I'm saying. She's got lots to say.
That's what I'm saying is that maybe for this essay, I think both points are really clear. You're not wrong. It was like, damn, that's all for sure. And I hear you, EJ, and the idea that it did not feel finished. And I do very much feel the way Linda felt, and I wonder how other people felt around this idea of what more can she say? And I think it's okay in a cishet body as a reader to question, oh, well, what am I looking for here? What am I looking for out of this other woman, out of this Black trans woman? Specifically, we gotta get that deep, right? We can't ignore it and act like that's not part of it. That's a huge part of this. That's a huge part of this. And we're not the only people who have that expectation. I'm sure many people pick up this book, see Laverne Cox's name on the cover because that's what they use to promote it, right? Because she's an actor and she's in it. And I'm sure many people get that same sentiment. And it's important for us, especially as Black people, to consider that when we read the stories of our trans family, you know, especially if we don't identify in that. Like, what am I actually looking and asking of and for of this person? How do other folks feel? Were you like, Laverne Cox, thank you? Were you like, Laverne Cox, girl, I wanted more? Was it something that didn't even move you? Greg?
Yeah, I think she packed a lot into it. I mean, she starts with the anecdote of being, you know, singled out when she's out and scared, and that armor, like Tiffany mentioned as well, which I guess is a recurring theme she brings up, goes into generational trauma with a great-grandfather and a grandfather, and then gets into a little bit with gender and anti-transness and transphobia, and even ties it into the idea of the emasculation of Black men. And that is a larger essay. That is a longer essay. There are books on it. Like, so for me, it's alluding to these concepts that you can't just knock out in a few pages anyway. So like you've been saying, it's like, yes, the onus then, if you want to know more, is on us to search out those other works that do talk about it, because all those themes, those heavy themes are there. It's just, and she touches on them, but doesn't go as in depth as you'd like. But this is very real shit. I mean, the section about Black men and what happens to them, and then connecting that to her own transness, you know, the idea of being born one way, assigned male at birth, and then having the decision of, you know, getting surgery and removing that part of yourself, like all of that ties into it.
Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts?
Willie.
Willie, what you think? Tiffany, want to hear from you?
I just thought I was listening to it, and I think I coughed and it was over. So it was like, I was just like, okay, hurt people, I'm tired.
Right.
You know, and I did kind of like, I did like Tiffany and EJ saying, like, I did want more, just because, you know, a lot of the stories in there were kind of like, you know, full-bodied experiences. And when it came to Laverne's, it was just like, you know, like, I know that she has so much work on. It was just like, okay, we talk about the pharmacy experience, and it was just like, it just like scratched the surface a little bit, you know, where I wanted more of like a deeper dive. So I would say it was definitely one of the stories that I was left craving more, and a little disappointed at the same time.
We also have to acknowledge Laverne's celebrity within this cohort of writers. She's probably one of the few. I mean, I don't think people outside of the literary world know who Jason Reynolds is. And he's a really big name, you know, within the book world. So I could see someone like Laverne Cox being invited simply because they wanted to include her name on the cover. And she is it's not like she's not a smart person. She has written and created projects around this.
Right, she's extremely intelligent.
Which makes me go, well, let's take a second then and go back to curation for a moment, because I was just giving Brené flowers, and I'm not going to take them away or nothing, but I may pull a petal off of one, because I wonder, again, you know, in the idea of curating something that's for all of us and then trying to incorporate different voices, could she have found a Black trans person who had more commitment, more time to the curation of this project, and maybe told a better story? Was it important to, and we don't have to answer these, I'm just putting them out there. Was it important? Yep, who's talking? Talk.
Oh, I think one thing to add too is that question of who is she writing this for, right? Who is Laverne writing this for, right? When she's writing her own book, I bet there's a broader audience, probably particularly of trans folks, that she's trying to speak to and connect with. And I do wonder from I know there were a couple non-binary folks, but from somebody coming out and saying, I am trans in this book, right? I think it's her. And I just wonder about that in the context of transphobia, like, right, this is for Black people. And in the context of transphobia in the Black community, which is not like worse than any other community, but is there, I also wonder what was, I can't answer the question about too much, too little, but I just wonder, like, who was she writing this for? Like, what was her audience? And has her, does that impact how and why she has other kind of, she talks in other spaces or writes in other spaces? Like, what did it mean that she was writing for this particular collection of essays? Did that mean something? And to your point, Paul, I do appreciate you naming the fact, like, yeah, what is our expectation? What would have been enough? So like, I get this was short and it's not enough, but then sitting with like, well, what would have been enough? What would she have written that I would have felt like this is now okay for me who doesn't have a really significant aspect of her identity.
Mhm.
I think that's a good reflection.
Right. Because, or speaking to the idea, trans identity itself in whatever labor that is, then having to go back and sort of reveal some feelings and some sentiments around that labor. I think maybe if you're not trans, you may be asking for a lot. Maybe it's okay to just not get the feelings or the sentiments, but just know that the labor is done on her part, you know? And if you want to know specifically what that looks like, you look more into her. No, we didn't, Tasha, but even if we did, go for it. Tasha's asking, did y'all already discuss unlearning shame and remembering love? Well, which one to talk about? Go for it.
I see that set up, Paula. I see that. Hey, family. It's been a minute, but I wanted to make sure I was here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this passage got quite a few highlights for me, and annotations and all the things.
Tasha, can you let us know what page you're on? So sorry for those that want to follow along.
So on page 158, I definitely put like asterisks around shame untreated stifles love. Like for sure, it was like multiple asterisks. But what was really interesting about this text that I found myself making revisions to was, again, on page 158, the paragraph that says, white supremacy, which y'all know I don't say supremacy, I say terrorism. White terrorism shames us out of our humanity and programs us to shame one another at its surface. It was interesting that if we're talking about unlearning shame and remembering love, and not being clear that that's the motivation behind this ideology, and that it doesn't have to do that, right? So for me, my revision was white terrorism attempts to shame us out of our humanity and programs us in a certain way, because I think it's important to highlight what it can do, what it has been successful in doing, but that there's an alternative to that. And you can't be talking about unlearning and still making it feel finite, right? To say that something is mean that there's something that isn't. And they also did that again in on page, I was just like, that ain't gonna work. On page, on page 156, end of right before the number 2, the sentence is, so in order to speak of my own shame and of shame and Blackness, I need you to first understand that through the lens of white terrorism, being Black is shame. And I was like, yo, bro, like that just reverberated in my body. Like, no. It can be projected as shameful, that there is a majority conception that if you are Black, you have much to be ashamed of, but that ain't my reality.
Right. I see what you're saying, that in our bodies, we have choice.
Right, and I think that if we're going to frame this text as unlearning shame and remembering love, in that statement, you're not remembering love. You're actually honoring the shame.
Right. Can I pose something to you though?
Absolutely.
I don't know, I think you're completely 100% correct in the Black lens. Is it not stating that in white terrorism, in white supremacy, this becomes shame? And so therefore it is not true because we're not navigating our lives in that lens?
But we have to understand there's one text that talked about it too, the relationship of Blackness to whiteness. So if we're not conceptualizing this relationship, right, then we're perpetuating it. So I'm not a white terrorist, right? But in internalizing this language, I'm distancing myself from a truth that's embodied in myself. And to continue.
But wait, but you're not, right?
No, I'm saying I'm not a white terrorist.
Right. So let's go back a little bit.
Go ahead.
Reread what read what
reread
they
the
said
sentence.
versus what you think it needs to say. That I think that makes it most clear.
Okay. So in order to speak of my own shame, I'm quoting my own shame as a Black person and the shame of Blackness, I need you to first understand that through the lens of white terrorism, being Black is shame. So that's what I'm saying. If you're claiming this Blackness and you're talking about your own shame, framing it as such is doing the work of the white terrorist.
Okay, I hear you. I read that. Tell me what y'all think, because I thought that was just saying in white lens or in white scope or in white supremacy or in white terrorism. It's shame.
I would agree with you had they not put in the preface of that statement as in speaking of my own shame and the shame of Blackness.
Okay.
If you were just framing it like white supremacy puts Blackness as shameful, I'd have been like, all right, cool.
That makes sense.
You inserted your Blackness and the shame that you've internalized and married those two together. And so if we're gonna marry that together in a text that speaks to unlearning shame and remembering love, they didn't remember love in that moment.
How are folks feeling?
I think that we have, and some people might have just glossed right over that. You know what I mean? Some people are like, all right, cool, I get what you're saying, whatever. But there's the embodied experience that we have to, in this moment, move from. There's nothing shameful about being Black. Not for me. You know what I mean? But that's also an understanding of the deep work that I had to do to break form. Right? That is
I think you're beautiful, Tasha. You're a beautiful person. I think you're beautiful.
Thank you. But you know what I'm saying? Like there has been this internalized language. Like as someone who is of Haitian descent, I've heard that, oh, you cute for a Haitian girl, you cute for a dark-skinned girl. Oh, if you can be articulate, then you white. And I've heard all of those things that in my body, I couldn't exist wholly.
Right. And I think, Tasha, you're naming something that is really prevalent and sort of answered the question that I asked earlier, way earlier, don't worry about it, which was like, is there anything that you're learning here, anything that you've read that actually allows you to reframe your own perspective in your own life? And something that I'm understanding, right, is that, sure, in the Western United States, because we are Black, white supremacy will try and attempt to shame us. And that story has sort of been the story. But what you're saying is that in order to unlearn it, if we're really gonna get away from it, if we're really gonna be free, right? Liberation, that's the only word I could think of. Then that projection, that lens cannot be my experience. Just because white supremacy is attempting to shame me doesn't mean that I live in that shame. Now, some people may go, sure, but I still have to navigate that shame. So to me, I'm living in it. But what I hear you name, Tasha, is that like, that is not real for you. And I just think that's really great and important to name. And I really thank you for that, because that's the point of a book like this, you know?
And also really quickly is we're not going to move differently if we don't position the alternative. Right? I can't move down a different path or discover a new truth if I'm constantly being positioned with only one narrative, right? And to position Black as shame, that is already the recurring dominant narrative. And so for me, I think it's important in our literature to insert the alternative and another truth as much as possible.
Totally. And there's no, I'm not countering that statement at all, for sure. We need to be in other things beside Black pain, trauma, and all that shit. So there's nothing to say. Now what I'm about to say is completely different. Forget that Tasha just even said that, because there's nothing to do with what she said. This book itself is a curation of shame. It's like, I don't like lemon pie, but I invited y'all to my lemon pie club. Like, you know what I mean? It's this idea of like, you're totally, totally right. And I think in your ideologies and in your understanding, I say ideology as if it's something. In the way you navigate and the way you move in life, Tasha, you're naming something that's so vital, because what we're saying is that just because shame is what we're learning and shame is what we're examining as a group, it doesn't mean that it's actually a part of how we have to navigate as Black people. And I just think that's a tremendous learning. And this was a lemon pie club, right? This was a curation about shame. Brené Brown literally makes, I don't know her net worth. She rich though, right? She has a career and she has a community and she has standing because her work is centered on shame and vulnerability. And then she said, oh, I want to learn how this looks like for other people beside my white woman body, and met up with a Black woman. And then they curated and created this thing. So I think, thank you for naming that. Like, yes, the conversation here is shame. And is this the conversation that y'all are willing to continue to still have? Is there something else that we should be talking about?
You know what I found interesting? Almost all of the writers referenced Brené by name.
Yep.
But, or the contributors, but
yep.
Maybe one referenced Tarana Burke. And if, again, the cynic in me says that maybe Tarana was just put on this, in the introduction, they make it sound like it was Tarana's idea and they partnered and they went in and identified all the contributors. But well, maybe, go ahead, EJ.
Let's talk about that, Ron. Let's get into that.
Because it feels like it was Brené's project
instead of Tarana's. Okay,
but isn't it though? I thought we knew.
But just hang on, one more thing. Okay, I just can't imagine that. Again, I don't know what the final count, but it felt like every writer except maybe 2 or 3 references Brené.
Totally.
And that it just feels skewed intentionally. Like maybe Brené started this project on her own, so the writer's point of reference was only Brené, and then they brought in Tarana Burke.
Well, but can't we also say that maybe this was Tarana's idea, and that this was her power, and that the writers, maybe because of some other dynamics?
But what are those dynamics?
That Brené is her work. She is a psychologist and a professor on shame work. She does shame and vulnerability work. Tarana is an activist.
Exactly.
So
but I think as an activist and as the name on the cover, it just felt like even if it was gratuitous, you would have referenced Tarana equally as Brené. I'm talking about the contributors.
Yeah, but is that more on the contributor? Like, does that have to take away from Tarana's role, or is that the contributor? I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I guess what I'm saying is just the kind of the centering it as it's not Tarana's project, but it's really Brené's project kind of thing. And that's kind of what I'm just wondering, could it not be both, that it is her project, but that the contributors, for all of their different reasons, skewed their responses in order to connect to the white woman who's done the academic, like she has the quotes. Like they don't even just say Brené, right? They use her quotes. Yes. And so she has that to pull from. And so why are they choosing to do that? Maybe it's because like, oh, she has more experience editing. I'm not even saying it's a good reason. Like I'm still using a cynical reason why you're doing it. But I guess I just want to name that that might be more about them than Tarana's power.
It doesn't take away that Tarana didn't make major decisions, and it's not her project. I almost love the idea of it being her idea and then having this white woman do a lot of work. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying it went like that either. I'm just saying. Tasha, why are you raising your hand in a non-hand raised space?
You know, juicy. It was getting juicy. So while y'all were talking, it made me think about the piece Black Surrender Within the Ivory Tower. I think that's a great way to segue into Paula's is like, I'm
like, wow, y'all are killing me.
Well, what I wanted to say is referring to Ron. Ron, I agree with you. I kind of got the same concept throughout. Okay, let me put it this way. As I read this book, by the time I got to the end, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they would have gotten a Black female psychologist.
Why can you help but wonder, RG? Why?
I don't know. As I got towards the end, it just, the whole format of the book made me wonder that. Okay, so I'm understanding what Ron is saying, and I think not that there was anything wrong with because you know, it's like you said, Paula, one person is an activist and another person is like very even academically credentialed. She's a psychologist, okay? But I couldn't help wonder, why not a Black female psychologist instead of this? But you see what I mean? You know, it's hard to put into words, but that's why I'm saying I'm understanding what Ron is talking about.
But let's be clear.
Why not someone who's her equal?
Tarana brings scholarship. Like Tarana isn't some person
No,
that fell off a truck.
Right, no. But I didn't, I never said that she lacked scholarship or academia. RG is describing it as such because yes, she's a doctor. What I'm saying is that it's like if I threw, again, this is like a horrible example, but if I threw a lemon pie club, right? And then y'all are like, why is there no chocolate pie here? Why don't you thank chocolate pie for being a dope pie? And I'm like, because I'm working with lemons here. Like, it's lemon pie. I just thought it was a business thing. Like, she's the one they're working with, so they're gonna quote her more because when you're writing an essay about shame and vulnerability, you're gonna look to the person who's giving you the opportunity and then throw their quote in there. You know what I mean? Like, I saw it as a business tool. Whereas I think with Tarana's personal work, it's harder for someone else to come in and quote. I actually probably would have been offended, I think, if someone tried to co-opt some of Tarana's story because she's opening up herself and her daughter in this, you know? Tasha, is that hand permanently up? No. Talk whenever.
My comment got usurped. I didn't I wanted to make sure that there was a
she said usurped.
I want to make sure there was a placeholder so that, you know what I mean? But, you know, adding to this, I think we can just bring in the other text around steps in being whole, where there's the assimilating and striving for acceptance and like having to throw away these academic accolades, right? So for me, if the text is called vulnerability, shame, resistance, and the Black experience, you know, from the passages that I read, a lot of people are talking from an embodied experience that Miss Brown can never relate to. Right. You just never gonna know.
And she says that. She says that in the beginning of the book. The whole.
But you know what I appreciate in this text, the steps to being whole. What is the steps to being whole or the surrender part? Let me show you on the page when he talked about the bravery. What sex was that? Around
I got the audio.
Oh yeah, it's page 189 around steps to being whole, where they talk about bravery. The passage goes, we cannot conclude because a white person is an active listener who acknowledges their privilege and recognizes inequity, that they will also be brave enough to take action or use their voice to counter inequity. Seeing a white person who is a learner, who is actively using their status, privilege, and knowledge to present and to be present and vocal in countering inequity is powerful. These are the people that I want in my corner. And they are likely the only white people you'll see at my kitchen table. Yes, I know there's a trapdoor for racism in any present relationships with white people. Their blind spots will show up, yada, yada, yada. So I think that whenever we talk about our embodied experiences, this is something that is always going to be looming in the background. But there is a real thing around Black surrender within the ivory tower. And so as people are questioning the ratio of acknowledgement in this text, you know, that wouldn't be foreign to Tarana either, as someone who's the founder of the Me Too movement. You know what I'm saying? Like, she put her stuff out there and all of a sudden the white people just came out of nowhere, and it was just like, you know, there was some obscurity around who was the founder. Like, there was a concerted effort from the community to having to reposition her as the person who propelled this movement. So I say all that to say, what I liked about the text around Black surrender in the Ivory Tower, the author speaks to the challenges that will arise from that, and how surrender offered them an opportunity to be still and to hear their inner voice, and how they made actionable plans to not only center their self-care for themselves, but for their students. And I think that that was probably the strongest part of that text, when they put self-care days and wellness days as excusable absences for their students in their syllabus. It was like, oh, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. So I think that it wasn't just, because I've seen a lot of text that just talks about the struggles, as we just honored June Jordan with the Mosaic Conference. And, we talk about Audre Lorde all the time. A lot of our prolific leaders within these ivory towers had to constantly surrender in a way that was not vital to their sustainability.
Yeah.
So to see someone activate the knowledge that they have from unlearning the shame and remembering the love, for me, was probably the most poignant part of that text, among other things.
Thank you so much for that. And it reminds me of something that EJ said long time ago. I don't even know if you remember this, EJ, but you did it perfectly. And she was like, I know I say great things. You did it perfectly when we were reading Zami, naming that, like, yes, Audre Lorde is on this particular path, but we actually still don't know how hard it is for her as she becomes a professor, as she goes through that. And that always stuck with me as we've continued to read. And now Tasha naming that, I'm just bringing those points together. Paula, I saw you had your hand up, and I love saying your name.
I did, and I think Tasha just spoke so powerfully. I've kind of forgotten what I was going to say in response to what she was talking about. Sorry.
Take it, Tasha.
I wanted to actually go back to something that Tasha, you said earlier, that's in the volume and in the reading that we read for tonight, because it's on two places. One is on page 180. It's when Bethia, whose essay I really found was interesting because it was so clear. It was kind of balanced by Perry, whose article comes next. But she talked about 4 ways of dealing with familiar patterns. And she goes through, and she has 3. And then the last one is the one that she really wants to land on: live wholeheartedly, recognizing white supremacy and deliberately making decisions on our values, while leaning into connection, compassion, and courage. And then as she goes through the chapter, I didn't even really notice this until I was listening to you and I was going through the chapter, because I wanted to talk a little bit about this one, that she actually divides the rest of the chapter into 1, 2, and 3, but she never gets to 4, which is kind of interesting. And but she does get to 4. She just doesn't number it, which I actually find kind of poignant. But she, on 187, she has a paragraph. The paragraph begins, "Place and space matter," and this reminds me of what Tasha was saying about finding a way that's not a response or mediated through sort of white terrorism, as Tasha put it. She says, place and space matter. Being vulnerable in places and spaces where we are, quote, not supposed to be, or where our truth has never been spoken and our vulnerability has never been seen, is powerful. Being seen and compelling others to witness the violence of white supremacy invites accountability, injects truth into facade. This truth telling is a powerful step in dismantling white supremacy, putting cracks in it. And the cracks is really interesting to me. White women and anyone else with a target identity reap benefits of Black women's willingness to be vulnerable. When we are vulnerable, we are literally breaking chains. In the moment we are vulnerable in these white spaces through our truth telling, we're inviting an invitation to authenticity and potential connection to those who aren't assaulted by white supremacy in the same way as Black women. And elsewhere, she talks about this as choosing to be vulnerable as opposed to having no choice about being vulnerable. And that's a really that's the thing that, and that's a really different phenomenon. And I just thought that this was, for me, like almost the most, in some ways, that we sort of thinking of, sort of survivance instead, or joy instead of that. She's defining the sort of parameters of a place where there can actually be healing and love and joy. And I thought she did it really well here. So anyway, that's the part I was thinking of that when you were speaking.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, absolutely. That connection between being vulnerable and then the choice to be vulnerable, right? And like sort of where that leads us. Excellent. I have some announcements, but I want to make sure we get some thoughts out. So pause on your thoughts, keep a tab while I make these announcements. It's the final session for this book, right? Meaning that we don't meet next week. We don't meet until the new year. Merry Krima, happy, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all the other things that folks celebrate. I don't know why I'm saying it in an odd accent. Our next book is going to be I Don't Want to Die Poor by Michael Arsenault. And we're going to meet same time. And our first session for that is going to be January 4th. Okay. And that's going to run on Tuesdays all the way to the end of the month. I love January. It's my birthday. Every time we have book club in January, I'm even more turned than I am now. So get excited, wear your party hats. We're going to have fun every Tuesday.
I already have the book. I have the book for the
Let's
next
go, Susan. Let's go.
I can't wait to read it.
A really quick bio. And if you want, you could click the link in the chat right now to register, but you will receive an email and opportunities to register, but just make sure you register and get it out the way. Michael Arsenault has never shied away from discussing his troubles with debt, but in I Don't Want to Die Poor, he reveals the extent to which it has an impact on every facet of his life, how he dates, how he seeks medical care, or in some cases, how he's unable to, how he wrestles with the question of whether or not he should have chosen a more financially secure path, me every day, and finally, how he has dealt with his dream turning into an ongoing nightmare as he realizes one bad decision can unravel all that he's earned. Actual economic anxiety. I'm really excited to read this book. I think it's important for folks in community to come around and find our own anxieties around finances and how we navigate, surviving, particularly for those of us from New York City. And bing, 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 2 days after my birthday gift, so early, Michael Arsenault is gonna join us on the 18th of January. So, but don't go MIA and I don't see you. Don't go MIA and I don't see you, and then now you wanna come on the 18th. Please try to join us for our sessions, and we'll be so excited. And hopefully if we have questions and stuff, as a group, as a family, we can ask him, right? I also wanna name that it's the holiday time, so end of the year donations. We just want to give a thanks on Ron for behalf of Literary Freedom Project to everyone who's helped support the space this year. If you want to make a tax deductible donation, come on, Uncle Sam, forget about him. You can visit Literary Freedom Project. I'm making it up. You can visit Literary Freedom Project.org.
Look at Tasha's sweatshirt. That's one of our sweatshirts. Thank you, Tasha.
Yeah, I got a sweatshirt.
Get a sweatshirt.
I like those.
Buy merch, donate.
Well, whenever, however.
If you also, no, we'll just keep it for that. Just keep your mind down for the donate link. What I was going to say is that as we're still in bad weather, so don't worry about it right now. But if you're in New York City and any kind of spaces, venues that could fit a lot of people, message Ron, send it his way. We're looking for venues for the spring in the Bronx. Yeah, I gotta be in the Bronx. Ron is not going to Brooklyn. Okay. He'll go, but not for book club. I think that's everything I've named. Any final thoughts around this book? Is there anything you want folks to know? How big a space? Ron, you want to just plug it real quick so folks know what to look for?
So we've had as many as 50 people come to a book club. So I try to set that as the upper space, 50. It has to be wheelchair accessible. So please keep that in mind also, because oftentimes there are many spaces, but if there's even one step, there's a good chance I probably won't want to program there. So that's it. It has to be, a big room. And if they have chairs, that's even better.
Community space. I've been there when it's been 50 plus people. Okay.
Have you checked out the Al Friedman home on the concourse across from the museum? They do a lot of
the Andrew Freeman home.
Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew Friedman. yeah, I'll keep them in mind also, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, folks. Like I said when we first started this session for this particular book, it is a lot to be in your regular individual anxieties and then talk about somebody else's and then come to a club and now be in everybody else's, right? And I just want to thank you for bringing your own sense and your own experiences to this book. Often when we discuss books together as a group, people open up and say their personal experiences, but I feel like with this one in particular, y'all really just shared some real shit every week. And I don't take it lightly. I understand that like our past experiences deeply, deeply influence who we are. And I just want to say that I'm proud of all of you for your past experiences and for the ways that you've been able to navigate your own vulnerability and shame. And it really makes me feel whole. This has been like a really rough couple of weeks for me, and book club has really, I'm getting fake emotional. Maybe it's the end of the year. Book club has really allowed me to be like in my own sense of self and not feel alone. So I really thank you all deeply. Tasha, that hand better not be up. I swear to God. You're bugging. Like just
I was
talk.
not trying to disturb your moment. Like, can I live? That's why they got the reactions, okay? That's why they got the hand joints, okay? Let me use my Zoom tools, okay?
They won't even let you be polite, Tasha.
I won't even.
Jeez. So kind of like piggying back off of what Paula just offered, it made me think about that concept that was referred to in the Black Surrender Within the Ivory Tower on page 173. The bottom paragraph that says, in South Africa, a common greeting is Skawabona. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Which translates to I see you, or I acknowledge your existence. The response to this greeting is Tikona, which means I am here. When you see me, you bring me into existence. The more I think about it, the more it feels as though in every space I enter, I am waiting for someone to exchange this pleasantry with, not just in word, but in intention. I was just like, man, shit. See me, you know what I mean? And it's just like, these are the moments where that vulnerability that the other author was distinguishing, you know what I mean? To see someone in their belief, there also needs to be a guard that's let down, right? And then for the reciprocity of like, to say that when someone sees you, it brings your own existence into space. Like if that ain't human, I don't know what it is. And so that felt, I could feel that in my body on a visceral level. And then the way Jessica ended the text altogether on page 178, it was never about what I had to obtain and always about recognizing what I carried innately. Dangerous is the woman who can give herself what she used to seek from others. Limitless is the woman who dares to name herself. The way I see it, shame cannot oppress what acceptance has already claimed for sovereignty. Man, I wanted to throw the book. I was like, ow! That's it.
Mic drop for sure.
That's it. That's it. Like, it was, you know, I was just like, if that ain't it in a nutshell, like when we stop seeking externally and recognize like what we have internally, you just show up differently. You move differently, like not knowing that I need someone to make me feel good about myself in order to feel good about myself. And then in seeing that person, that it brings your own, I was like, where Jessica at? Bring her into the group. That joint was bomb.com. It was bomb.com.